At 3 in the morning, my phone vibrated on the nightstand. I opened my eyes. The screen's glow was harsh enough to sting. My son Leo was asleep in the next room. A 6-year-old is a restless sleeper, and I had just gone in to pull the covers back over him a little while ago. I answered the phone, and Ava's voice detonated through the speaker. Julian's been in a car accident. Internal organ damage. Massive hemorrhaging. The blood bank doesn't have enough. Her words came rapid fire, each one driving in like a nail. You need to bring Leo to City Center Hospital right now. He's a rare blood type. He's the only one who can save Julian. She said it with such absolute entitlement, the same way she had for the past 7 years. Ini sat up, using the streetlight filtering through the window to glance at the calendar on the nightstand. Today was Thursday. Tomorrow Leo had school and I had work. But none of that mattered in Ava's eyes. Julian's affairs always came first. All right, I said. Ava paused on her end, probably surprised I'd agreed so readily. She gave a curt and hung up. Ini set the phone aside. Ini didn't get out of bed immediately. The bedroom was very quiet. The curtains weren't drawn all the way, and moonlight leaked through the gap, falling across the floor like a pale, sickly ribbon. Barefoot, I stepped onto the floorboards. They were cold. Ini bent down and pulled open the bottom drawer of the nightstand. Buried under some old documents, at the very bottom was a craft paper envelope. Ini pulled it out. The edges of the envelope had grown fuzzy from wear and tear, the kind of mark left only by being handled too many times. Ini slid the papers out, the heading in bold letters, Divorce Agreement. Ini had drafted this agreement a long time ago. In so long, the paper had already begun to yellow, so long I couldn't quite remember exactly which year or month I'd shoved it into this drawer. 7 years of marriage, 3 of them in name only. I'd watched, like a bystander, as my own wife exhausted herself running around for another man, calm to a degree that even I found absurd. The agreement laid everything out clearly. The house went to me. In savings, split 50-50. Leo's custody went to me with visitation rights determined by me. Ava would be responsible for her own debts. This included all the medical expenses she'd fronted for Julian over the years. I'd gone through those accounts and sorted every single one. Ini picked up a pen lying in the corner of the drawer and flipped to the last page. On the signature line, I had signed my name long ago. Now, I uncapped the pen and added another line at the bottom of the agreement. The handwriting clear and precise, all debts incurred during the existence of the marriage are hereby settled. Each party shall henceforth independently bear their own legal and financial responsibilities. I dated it today. Ini folded the agreement back up, slipped it into the envelope and tucked it into the inner pocket of my jacket. Then I got up to wake Leo. The child was deeply asleep and groggy as I lifted him. His little head lolled onto my shoulder, and he mumbled "Daddy" against me. Ini patted his back and said softly, "Good boy, let's get dressed. We're going out for a bit." "Where to?" Leo asked, rubbing his eye. "The hospital." I pulled his jacket onto him and zipped it all the way up. "Your mum needs us for something." At the word mum, Leo's eyes lit up briefly, then dimmed again. And at 6 years old, he'd already learned to be wary of hope when it came to her. He obediently let me take his hand, asking no further questions. We went downstairs and hailed a cab. The streets were deserted in the early morning hours. The taxi sped along, the glow of neon lights sweeping across the windows in rhythmic arcs. Leo fell back asleep, leaning against me, breathing evenly, his small hand clutching the hem of my shirt and not letting go. Ini looked down at him at his hand. That hand, pale and slender, with veins clearly visible beneath the skin. The last blood draw had also been at this hospital. Ava said Julian needed backup plasma for a surgery. She'd coaxed and cajoled Leo into going, saying it was just a tiny bit and wouldn't hurt. Ini was away on a business trip that day. Ini only found out Leo hadn't been to school when his kindergarten teacher called. By the time I rushed back, Leo's left arm was a massive purplish-blue bruise. The area around the needle mark was swollen high. Nava wasn't even in the room. The nurse told me she'd gone to personally deliver the plasma to Julian. To this day, I remember exactly what Leo said. tilting his head up at me. "Daddy, I'm not afraid of it hurting. Mom said if I give blood, Uncle Julian will get better. And when Uncle Julian gets better, Mom will come home." He was 5 years old then, and already he'd learned to trade his own body for his mother's smile. The taxi pulled up at the entrance to City Center Hospital. Inai paid the fare, scooped up Leo, and got out. The emergency building blazed with light. People were running back and forth in the corridors, gurney wheels screeching harshly against the floor. The air reeked of disinfectant. Ava was waiting for me right at the registration desk in the ER lobby. She was wearing a cream-colored trench coat, her long hair pulled back in a careless ponytail. Her face was bare of makeup, her lips dry and chapped. It was clear she'd rushed over the second she got the news, not even pausing to change clothes. But even so, standing there, she was still strikingly beautiful, tall, with delicate features, the kind of woman who made people look twice, even without a trace of makeup. That was exactly what had captivated me 7 years ago. "What took you so long?" The moment Ava saw me, she strode over quickly, reaching out to take Leo's hand. "Come on, hurry upstairs with me. They're waiting in the OR." I shifted sideways, blocking her from touching Leo. "We'll go in. First, I have something to say to you." I walked on, carrying my son. Ava froze for a second, then followed with a frown. "Julian is lying on the operating table. Can't whatever you have to say wait until after the blood draw?" I ignored her, walked straight to the waiting area, found a bench, and sat down. Leo woke up, rubbing his eyes and looking around. When he saw Ava, he instinctively shrank back into my arms. "Daddy," he called softly, his voice laced with unease. Inai patted his back. "It's okay. Daddy's here." Then I reached into my jacket, took out the craft paper envelope, and handed it to Ava. "Sign it." Ava took the envelope, opened it, and pulled out the papers. She stood under the harsh fluorescent lights, paging through the divorce agreement. Around us in the ER, there were the sounds of patients moaning, families arguing, the metal clatter of nurses pushing instrument carts past. Inai watched her quietly, watched her expression change bit by bit. She reached the last page and saw the line I'd added this morning. Then she looked up, her eyes fixed on me for several seconds with the gaze of someone staring at a stranger. From down the corridor, a doctor's voice called out, "Julian's family, please come to the OR entrance." Ava's hand, clutching the agreement, trembled. She looked toward the OR, then back down at the black and white document in her hand, her lips pressing into a thin, bloodless line. "Are you serious?" Ava's voice was very soft, but the knuckles of the hand holding the paper had gone bone white. Inai nodded. "I drafted this agreement a long time ago. Not a single term is up for negotiation. You sign, I take Leo upstairs to give blood. You don't sign, I'm taking him home right now." Something shattered in Ava's eyes. It wasn't sadness. It was the fury and disbelief of someone being defied for the first time. She stepped forward, thrusting her face right up to mine, and spat the words out, practically one syllable at a time. "You're using Julian's life as a bargaining chip." I didn't retreat. "I'm not bargaining. I'm informing you. It's over between us, Ava." Ava stood in the hospital corridor, the divorce agreement clutched in her hand, staring at me without moving a muscle. At the far end of the hall, the operating room light was still on, nurses occasionally hurrying in and out. Julian's life hung by a thread, and this fact stripped Ava of what little patience she usually had. She folded the agreement haphazardly, shoved it into her trench coat pocket, and spoke in a tone that said she had no time for my nonsense right now. "Let's get the blood drawn first. I'll talk to you about this when I get home." She then reached for Leo's hand. Leo evaded her, both arms wrapping tightly around my leg. "Leo, be good." Ava frowned, crouching down to bring herself to his eye level. She made an effort to soften her voice, the corner of her mouth curving into a forced smile. "Mommy's not being mean. Mummy's just worried. Uncle Julian is in there waiting. You can help him, okay? Just like last time. Just a tiny bit of blood." Last time. When I heard those two words, a surge of fury rose in my chest. But I didn't lose my temper. After 7 years, I'd learned not to lose my temper in front of this woman. It was useless. She would never think she was in the wrong. She would only see me as making a fuss, being emotional, not being understanding enough. I simply moved Leo behind me and met Ava's gaze levelly. Signed the agreement. Ava shot to her feet, her voice rising half an octave. Do you not understand the situation right now? Julian is in there hemorrhaging. You have to pick this moment. Yes, this moment. I cut her off. Right now. I've brought my son here, and you are here too. Sign, and I take him to give blood. After the draw, we leave. Don't sign, and I take him home to sleep right now. The nurses in the OR know me. I can take him to get his blood drawn directly. You can't stop me, Ava said. You can try. When I said this, my tone was utterly calm as if I were discussing the weather and suggesting a walk outside. Anava was stunned. She stared at me, as if trying to confirm whether the man in front of her was really Ethan Winters, the one who for 7 years had agreed to everything she said and never once resisted. She looked me up and down, then let out a cold laugh. So it's this routine again. She pulled the collar of her trench coat tighter and turned to walk toward the elevator. You do this every single time. The moment something doesn't go your way, you bring up divorce. 7 years. How many times have you mentioned divorce? 10? 15? Aren't you tired? I haven't kept count, I said. I have. Ava glanced back at me, her eyes filled with mockery. Every time it's all thunder and no rain. You've drafted this agreement how many times now? And not one has ever taken effect. The elevator doors opened, and she stepped in first. I picked Leo up and followed. We were the only 3 in the elevator. The floor numbers ticked down. 6th floor, 5th, 4th. Ava leaned against the elevator wall, arms folded across her chest, her posture one of absolute condescension. It was indeed a habit of hers, needing to maintain the upper hand with everyone, including me, including Leo. Leo, resting on my shoulder, called out softly, "Mommy." Ava didn't hear him, or she heard and didn't respond. She was staring at the numbers ticking above the door, a tight knot furrowed between her brows, her mind entirely consumed by the childhood friend lying on that operating table. Silently answered the question she had asked. Yes, I had brought up divorce many times before, and every time she had deflected it with a few words. She called me disruptive, called me immature, called me petty. The most absurd time was when she hadn't even finished reading the agreement before taking a phone call and leaving in a rush. Julian had asked her to dinner. She left her husband, who was mid-conversation about their divorce, to go meet another man. So this time I said nothing. Facts carried more weight than any words ever could. Ava strode straight for the OR. The moment she got off the elevator, I followed behind at an unhurried pace. Leo's legs dangled, bumping against my knees, and I paused to retie his shoelace. 2 nurses stood outside the operating room. One recognized Ava and hurried over. "Doctor, Ava, mister. Julian's blood pressure has stabilized. He's temporarily out of danger, but the plasma reserves are still insufficient. The subsequent surgery will still require at least..." "The blood is here?" Ava turned and waved at me, the exact same gesture she used at home to motion me over to grab a package delivery. "Leo, come here." I didn't move. Ava's hand froze midair. From my silence, she read something she had never seen before. The impatience drained from her face. She took me in again, a re-evaluation in her eyes, like someone trying to get a new read on a person they thought they'd figured out long ago. "Ethan Winters," she said, my full name, her voice dropping low. "What exactly do you want?" With one hand, I pulled out my phone from my jacket and held the screen up for her to see. It was my banking app's SMS notification page. Ava saw what was on the screen, and her face finally changed color. Her expression shifted from confusion to shock, from shock to anger, all within a span of maybe 2 seconds. The messages had been sent that evening. She probably hadn't noticed yet. The supplementary card tied to my credit card, the one she used, had been frozen. The supplementary card linked to the mortgage account was frozen. Even the debit card she habitually used to book Julian's specialist appointments and buy imported medications, I had unlinked that one too. The messages were unmistakably clear. "The bank card ending in 3215 held by your supplementary card holder has been unlinked by the primary cardholder. You froze the cards? Her voice trembled, not with grief, but with being caught completely off guard. That was Ava. You could make her cry, but you could never let her feel out of control. The moment something slipped from her grasp, her entire being bristled with defensive spikes, like an animal in shock. You're cutting off my cards at a time like this. Julian is still in the operating room. Do you have any idea how much his follow-up treatment costs? Do you know? Don't you have your own salary? I said. Those words stopped Ava cold. And of course she had a salary. She was an associate chief of surgery at a major hospital, and her income was not low. But over the years, the bulk of her earnings had been spent on Julian's specialty drugs imported from abroad, private rehabilitation training, one thing after another, without ever a moment's hesitation. Her wallet was reserved for Julian. We, her husband and son, weren't worthy of spending her money. This wasn't something I just discovered today. 7 years ago, right after we married, she used her own savings to pay off a gambling debt for Julian. 3 years ago, after Julian's first car accident, she put down a $200,000 deposit for his hospital stay without even asking for an IOU. I once asked her, just once, if she could give me even half the care she gave Julian. She thought about it, then told me, "Why compare yourself to Julian? He has nothing. You have everything." I stopped asking after that, not because I agreed, but because I finally understood the answer. Some questions asked too many times leave the heart frozen solid. A draft blew in from the fire escape. Ainava's face looked terribly pale under the fluorescent lights. She clutched her phone, the screen continuously popping up with new payment failure notifications. Her beauty salon annual membership, her gym membership, a high-end private clinic account she shared with Julian, all of it was tied to my cards. Every card I froze sent another notification pinging to her phone. Those dinging notification sounds were like slaps across her face, one after another. Ava's eyes reddened. It was the first hint of tears from her tonight, but she held them back, refusing to let them fall. She just clenched her phone, her knuckles bloodless, staring at me. "You're trying to drive me into a corner." "I'm not driving you anywhere," I said. "You have your path. I have mine. We've just come to the end of this road together." I bent down and set Leo on his feet, holding his hand. I pulled the divorce agreement from the inner pocket of my jacket once more, and right there at the entrance to the operating room, placed it on the corridor bench. Nearby stood the nurses. From afar came the groans of patients. The fluorescent tubes buzzed overhead. Ava stood several paces away, her eyes filled with pure disbelief. Crouched down, straightened Leo's jacket collar, and wiped a bead of sweat that had just appeared on his forehead. My son looked up at me, his eyes dark and bright. He didn't ask any questions. He just stood there obediently, placing his small hand inside mine. Holding my son's hand, I started walking toward the other end of the corridor. I had gone about 10 steps when Ava's voice chased after me. It was squeezed out through gritted teeth, every word carrying a tremor she couldn't suppress. "Take Leo home to rest today. I'll deal with the surgery stuff here. And tomorrow we can sit down and talk calmly." I stopped walking but didn't turn around. "I have nothing left to talk to you about, Ava. Whether you sign or not, this divorce is final." Silence stretched behind me for a long time. So long, I thought she wouldn't speak again. Then came Ava's voice, not loud, wrapped in the scent of disinfectant and the cold draft of the corridor, carried to my ears with perfect clarity.
"You can't leave."
"Just like last time. Just like every time. You just want to scare me. You won't leave." Still holding Leo's hand, I kept walking. We entered the elevator. Pressed the button for the ground floor, and the doors slowly slid shut. In that final sliver before they closed, I saw Ava still standing there, alone on the bench near the operating room, her trench coat pocket bulging with my divorce agreement. The fluorescent lights at the end of the corridor were flickering, stretching her shadow long and thin, like the silhouette of a stranger. Leo tilted his head up and asked, "Daddy, is Mommy upset?"
"Yeah,"
I said. Leo was quiet for a moment, then said, Should we wait until she's not upset before we come see her again? I squeezed his little hand but didn't answer. This time, whether she was upset or not no longer had anything to do with us. The elevator reached the ground floor. The lobby was empty. The sky outside still dark. 3:40 in the morning. The city hadn't woken up yet. Carrying Leo, I walked out the hospital doors and looked up at the moon. The moon was a thin crescent, like a silent scythe. After returning from the hospital, I took 3 days off. Leo didn't go to kindergarten. Inai stayed home with him, building Lego sets, watching cartoons, and cooking his favorite tomato and egg noodles. We kept the curtains drawn tight. The TV in the living room played cartoons at high volume, as if trying to fill every last pocket of silence in the house. Inai didn't answer a single one of Ava's calls. She called 16 times, I counted. Each call rang for 40 seconds before automatically hanging up, then would start again minutes later. Inai didn't respond to her texts either, though the content of her messages got shorter and shorter, until the last one was just 3 words: pick up the phone. At 7 in the morning on the 4th day, I was frying an egg crepe for Leo when the door lock suddenly rattled. It was the sound of a key sliding into the lock. Inai turned off the burner and set down the spatula. The door was pushed open from the outside. Ava stood in the doorway. She wore a short black jacket, her hair uncombed. Her lips were chapped, and dark circles sat heavily beneath her eyes. It was clear she hadn't slept well in days, but her eyes were startlingly bright, that overly sharp clarity, born of sheer exhaustion. She didn't even change her shoes, just stepped right in. Julian's been moved to a regular ward, she said. Congratulations. I slid the finished egg crepe onto a plate, brought it to the dining table, and poured Leo a glass of milk. Leo was sitting at the table, a Lego figure in his hand. He called out "Mommy" when he saw Ava come in. Ava didn't look at him, and her entire focus was fixed on me, her eyes pinning me down like nails. You haven't answered my calls or replied to my messages for days. How long are you planning to drag this tantrum out? I'm not throwing a tantrum. I nudged the glass of milk closer to Leo's hand, telling him to eat while it was hot. Then I turned around, leaned back against the kitchen doorframe, and faced Ava. Julian owes the hospital nearly $400,000 in medical bills. Did you know that? Yes. You froze the cards. How is he supposed to afford his follow-up treatment? You have a salary. This retort made Ava's chest heave with frustration. She took a deep breath and switched to a different tone, one I knew all too well. It was the tone she always used when she thought I was being unreasonable. Ethan, can we talk about this rationally? Inai saved Julian's life. From day 1 of medical school, I said he was the most important friend I'd ever have. His parents died young, he has no family. There's only me. He's lying in a hospital bed right now. Inai can't just abandon him. She paused here, and when I didn't react, added, "It's just a little blood from Leo. What's the big deal?" What's the big deal? Those words hit the floor like someone driving a hammer into my heart. Inai said nothing. Inai turned, walked over to the dining table. Leo was eating his egg crepe with his head down, so well behaved, taking small bites along the edge, his cheeks puffed out. Sunlight leaked in through the gap in the curtains and fell on his soft hair. Inai crouched down and took hold of his left arm. "Leo, roll up your sleeve. Show Mommy." Leo looked up at me. This child was inherently averse to saying no. He put down the crepe and obediently rolled up his left sleeve. His arm was so thin, the skin so fair, making the marks on it horrifyingly stark. 3 needle marks. One was in the middle of the antecubital fossa. They'd missed the vein, leaving a massive purplish-blue bruise around it that still hadn't completely faded. Another was 2 fingers' width above his wrist. The skin around the puncture had scabbed over a deep red, with white edges forming as it healed. Only the scab had been partially rubbed raw again. The last one was on his outer forearm. This one was the oldest, healing the slowest. It wasn't bleeding anymore, but the surrounding area was still red and swollen. 3 needle marks. All the evidence from the last blood draw was still there. When Ava saw Leo's arm, she froze entirely. She took a step forward instinctively, then stopped. "How did it get like this?" She frowned, and there was finally a ripple of emotion in her voice. But it wasn't heartache. It was surprise. You forgot. I stood up and gently rolled Leo's sleeve back down. Last time, in same hospital, you took him to donate blood for Julian. You said it was just a tiny bit, that it wouldn't hurt. I told Leo to keep eating, then walked over and stood directly in front of Ava. That's exactly what you said last time. Just a little blood. What's the big deal? And the result? You didn't even notice the needle marks on his arm. You didn't even know he ran a low-grade fever for half a day after coming home. Ava opened her mouth. I was called into emergency surgery that day. When aren't you called into emergency surgery? My voice was low, calm, as if I were giving her a weather report. And when isn't your emergency surgery just cleaning up after Julian? You pay off his debts. You cover his medical bills. When he's lying in the ICU, you run faster than anyone. Anava. I've stopped asking what exactly the relationship between you and Julian is. 7 years. I've asked enough. There's nothing between Julian and me. I've told you 1,000,000 times. I don't care if there's something or nothing. I interrupted. What I care about is what you've done to Leo. I pulled out the chair next to Leo and sat down. My son had finished his crepe and was sitting there quietly, his eyes darting between me and Ava. His small hands rested on his knees, so proper, so well-behaved it made my heart ache. Leo is 6 years old. I tapped the tabletop with my finger. How many times has he given blood for Julian? 3. The first time he was 4. You said Julian needed backup plasma for a surgery. You coaxed and tricked him out of kindergarten. The second time he was 5. You did it while I was away on a business trip. Took him without even a word to me. The third time was just last month. You said it was just a tiny bit. Ava stood rooted to the spot, looking like someone had doused her with ice water. The night I came back from that business trip, Leo had a low fever. The needle site on his arm was swollen badly. He curled up in my arms and said, "Daddy, I'm not afraid of the pain." Mom said, "Once I give blood, Uncle Julian will get better. And when Uncle Julian gets better, Mom will come home." I looked directly at Ava. He thought you weren't home because Julian was sick. He thought that as long as his blood could cure Julian, you would come back to him. Ava's expression cracked inch by inch. Her lips trembled. In a strangled syllable caught in her throat, like she wanted to say something but ultimately couldn't form a single word. "He's 6 years old," I continued, my voice dropping almost to a whisper. "He doesn't even understand why he's being stuck with a needle again and again. All he knows is that when he bleeds, his mum is happy. And you tell me that's no big deal?" I picked up the empty plate in front of Leo and slammed it into the sink. The clatter of porcelain against stainless steel was jarring. Leo flinched, his shoulders hunching up. Inia immediately reached out and stroked his head, and he instantly relaxed again. "The agreement has been with you since that day at the hospital?" I walked to the entryway, picked up a pair of Leo's outgrown sneakers from the shoe cabinet, and dropped them into the trash bag by the door. As I tied the bag shut, I said, "Whether you sign it is your business. Whether we get divorced is up to me." Ava stood in the middle of the living room, still in the high heels that carried the smell of hospital disinfectant. She watched me tidying up, watched me wipe Leo's mouth, watched me pull out my phone to make a call, and finally squeezed out a sentence from the depths of her throat. "Ethan Winters, you're kicking me when I'm down." I turned back to look at her and couldn't help but let out a short laugh. "I'm kicking you when you're down. You feel sorry for him lying in a hospital bed with no one to care for him. Who feels sorry for the 3 unhealed needle marks on your son's arm?" Ava had nothing more to say. She took a step backward, her back hitting the door frame with a dull thud. She reached out to steady herself, her fingertips going white. Her entire body seemed to drain of strength, as if some invisible force had pulled the plug. Then she turned and stormed out, her heels clicking furiously. She left the door open. Enai walked over and closed it, the latch clicking firmly into place. Leo jumped down from his chair, ran over to me, and wrapped himself around my leg. His small face pressed into my knee, his voice muffled. "Daddy, don't fight with Mommy." I picked him up and patted his back. "We didn't fight. Daddy didn't fight with Mommy. Go wash your hands. We're going to see Uncle Nathan in a bit." Leo lifted his head from my shoulder and blinked. Does Uncle Nathan have a puppy? Yeah, he's got a golden retriever. His mind immediately veered away from the earlier events. He wriggled down from my arms and ran off to the bathroom on his own, dragging his little step stool over to the sink to wash his hands. I stood in the entryway and looked back at the living room. The glass of milk on the table was still faintly steaming. Sunlight slipped through the curtain gap. Dust motes dancing lazily in the beam of light. This home, we'd lived in it for 7 years. And today, for the first time, it didn't feel empty because of Ava's absence. That afternoon, Nathan came to pick us up in a black Volvo pulled up downstairs in our complex. Nathan leaned against the car door smoking a cigarette. When he saw me come out carrying a suitcase, he stubbed it out and nodded his chin up in greeting. "You're really moving out?" he asked. Really moving out. Nathan didn't pry. That was him. He never asked more than necessary, but he never missed a beat when something needed doing. He bent down, tossed Leo's little backpack into the back seat, helped me heave a suitcase into the trunk, then pulled open the passenger door and patted the seat. "Found you a place. 10 minutes from the firm, 5 minutes from the kindergarten. The landlord's an old client of mine. In month to month, no annual lease required." "Thanks." "Don't thank me. You owe me dinner for this." Leo poked his head out from the back seat. "Uncle Nathan, do you have a puppy at home?" "I do. His name's Barney." Nathan started the car and glanced at Leo in the rearview mirror. "I'll take you to play with him sometime." Satisfied, Leo grinned and settled back into his seat, starting to fiddle with his seatbelt. And as the car pulled out of the complex, I glanced out the window. The kitchen light on the 15th floor of our building was still on. I hadn't turned it off when I left. That light would probably stay on for a long time, until the electricity bill was forwarded to Ava, and she finally noticed. Nathan drove us to a new complex in the south of the city. An high-rise elevator apartment, 2 bedrooms and a living room, fully furnished and equipped. He helped me haul the luggage upstairs and pressed the keys into my hand. "That Julian case, the information you asked me to look into, I emailed it to you." Nathan stood at the door, his voice lowered so only we two could hear. "Loan agreements he's signed over the years, medical disputes, several questionable online loans. There's a lot of material. Once you've looked it over, just let me know how you want to proceed." "Got it." Nathan gave me a look, clapped me on the shoulder and left. Leo had already done a lap around the apartment and was now on the balcony, leaning against the glass door and looking down, shouting, "Daddy, look how high up we are." I opened the suitcase, hung his clothes one by one in the wardrobe, spread his Lego sets out on the living room coffee table, and turned the TV to the cartoon channel. The first meal in the new place was cooked by me. Nathan had stocked the fridge with a few things beforehand: eggs, vegetables, noodles, and a row of Yakult. I made 2 bowls of noodles, brought them to the coffee table, and we sat on the floor, father and son eating while watching TV. Halfway through the meal, Leo suddenly put down his chopsticks. "Daddy, does Mummy not want us anymore?" His voice was very soft, as if afraid of shattering something fragile. The cartoon characters on TV were laughing uproariously. The neon lights outside the window were just flickering on. The room smelled of tomato and egg noodles. He sat cross-legged on the floor, looking up at me with his small face. There were no tears in his eyes, just the earnestness of asking a very serious question. I set my chopsticks down and pulled him into my arms. "No," I said, "Mommy didn't abandon you." Leo looked down and started picking at his fingernails. "Then why is she never home?"
he whispered.
He was silent for a moment. There was so much I could say, but a 6-year-old wouldn't understand any of it. You couldn't explain marriage to him, or sacrifice, or who owed whom in a broken relationship. He couldn't grasp it. He only judged things in the simplest way possible. Mom isn't home. Does Mom not want me? Mom has her own things she needs to do. She's very busy. Before, we all lived together. And now Daddy will live here with you. If you miss Mom, you can call her. Leo thought about this. Will she answer? Yes, truthfully, I didn't know if Ava would answer, but I couldn't tell my child that I didn't know. Leo nodded. He picked up his chopsticks again, shoved a mouthful of noodles into his mouth, his cheeks puffing out. He chewed for a long time, then suddenly said something else. "Then I don't want to give blood anymore." My hand paused. "No more," I said. No one will ever make you give blood again. That night, after I'd coaxed Leo to sleep, I sat in the living room of the new apartment and opened my laptop to look at the email Nathan had sent. The email contained the files on Julian, scattered across over a dozen pages. In his itemized hospital bills, scanned copies of loan agreements he'd signed over the years, records of several court mediation sessions, and screenshots of chat logs. One particular line jumped out at me. Inava's name appeared in the guarantor column on 3 separate loan agreements. Ini. I stared at that name for a long time before closing the laptop. Outside the window, the city was a blaze of lights. Ini sat in the unfamiliar living room, listening to the even sound of Leo's breathing drifting from the next room, and suddenly realized the boulder that had been sitting on my chest for 7 years had somehow at some point loosened. The next evening, a message from Ava came in. Julian woke up. "Can you bring Leo to see him? He's recovering well. It would make him happy to see Leo." I read the message twice, then turned the phone screen off and got up to wash an apple in the kitchen, and my phone lit up again. I meant Julian would be happy, not forget it. Can you not be like this? If you have something to say, just say it to my face, okay? I sliced the apple in half and handed one half to Leo, who was sprawled on the coffee table drawing. Leo munched the apple and looked up. "Daddy, are we going to kindergarten tomorrow?" "Yes." "Is Mommy picking me up?" "Mom is working." "Daddy will pick you up." Leo gave an "oh" and went back to drawing his dinosaurs. Outside, the sky had darkened completely. Night always fell fast in this city. Ini leaned back on the sofa, watching my son's profile as he drew with utter concentration, and suddenly remembered something. Julian had woken up. The person who had stayed by his side for 3 days and nights without sleep probably hadn't had a proper meal yet herself. But what I needed to do tonight was simple: draw with my son, tuck him into bed, and then get a good night's sleep myself. There were many things waiting for me to do tomorrow. Inava had informed me immediately when Julian woke up. Ini didn't reply, nor did I take Leo to the hospital. The days passed quietly and uneventfully for over a week. Every day, I dropped Leo off at kindergarten, went to the law firm, picked him up after work, came home to cook, and on weekends took him to Nathan's to play with Barney, the golden retriever. The fridge in the new apartment gradually filled with food. Leo's clothes filled his small wardrobe piece by piece. The living room coffee table was perpetually covered in his Lego sets and dinosaur drawings. Life for us, father and son, was slowly building a new rhythm. There was no word from Ava's side. She hadn't brought up the divorce agreement again, and I hadn't asked whether she'd signed it. She was at the hospital, busy caring for the newly awakened Julian, likely with no extra energy to deal with me. That suited me just fine. The upheaval came on the 11th day. That afternoon, I had picked Leo up from school, and we were just reaching our building when I spotted a familiar figure leaning against the entrance to our unit. Inava was dressed in a grey cardigan, clutching a craft paper document folder in her hand. The expression on her face was something complex I had never seen before. "What are you doing here?" I pulled Leo slightly behind me. Neva didn't launch into an attack like she usually would. She just stood there, her fingers warping the document folder out of shape, her lips moving several times before she managed to speak. "You paid off the bill." "What bill?" "The medical bills for Julian." She opened the folder and pulled out a thick stack of printouts. City Center Hospital, the rehab center, the imported meds from Renji Pharmacy, totaling over 170,000. The hospital finance department told me they've all been settled. She thrust the pile of bills in front of me, the papers trembling slightly in her hand. It was paid through an insurance claim. Ini went to the insurance company to check. "The beneficiary is Leo. The policyholder," her voice broke here, "was your father, Thomas Winters." The moment my father's name left her lips, something in my chest twisted hard. That was the education fund my father left for Leo. I said. Ini delivered these words with utter calm, but each one felt like it was being wrenched through clenched teeth. Inava froze, her hand holding the bills still suspended in mid-air. "You used it to pay Julian's medical bills." "I didn't use it," I said, looking into her eyes. "You did." Ava's mouth fell open, and the color drained from her face inch by inch. Inai had the neighbor's wife, who happened to be passing by, watch Leo for a moment, and then I went upstairs. Inava followed, her heels clacking rapidly on the stairs. Inai opened the door, walked to the study, and took the tin document box down from the bookshelf. Inai had long since organized its contents. On top was the insurance company's claim settlement notice. Insured, Leo Winters. Policyholder, Thomas Winters. Policy type, education annuity with additional critical illness medical coverage. My father had started paying the premiums the year Leo was born, over $20,000 a year. In a retired school teacher, he'd saved his entire life, wanting to leave his grandson a guarantee for his future education. In the insurance terms were clearly written, upon the death of the policyholder, the cash value of the policy would be inherited by the insured and used for the insured's education and medical expenses. My father passed away the year Leo turned 2. And as he was dying, he held my hand and said, "Don't touch this insurance policy. Leave it for Leo's college fund." I knelt at his sickbed and promised him, swore to him that I would safeguard it for Leo. The total insurance payout was $230,000, I said, setting the settlement notice down in front of Ava. Of that, $170,000 was used to pay off Julian's medical bills. Ava stared at the notice, her fingers slowly pressing against her own lips. "Where's the remaining $60,000? She asked. Inai let out a humorless laugh. "You want to know? Fine, I'll tell you. $38,000 paid off Julian's rehabilitation fees from his last hospitalization. Yes, you heard that right. The time before this one, 2 years ago, Julian owed money to the rehab center. They came looking for him at the hospital. You covered half with your own salary, and I filled in the rest. The remaining $22,000 paid the interest on his gambling debt from 7 years ago." Ava's face had gone utterly white.
"That's impossible," she said.
"The gambling debt from 7 years ago, You clearly paid off the principal for him. What about the interest?" I leaned back against the desk, tapping the surface with my finger. "The principal was $300,000. You paid it with your own savings. The interest compounded for 7 years. It rolled into $22,000. The debt collectors came to me, not you, because they knew exactly how much you were worth." She didn't know any of this. She had never known. When I married her 7 years ago, I knew Julian existed. At the time, I thought he was just her childhood friend, someone she'd grown up with. The first year of our marriage, Julian racked up gambling debts. Inava took all her dowry money and paid it off for him. It didn't say anything. The second year, he owed money again. Inava came to me for it, and I gave her my year-end bonus. After that, I stopped keeping count of how many times it happened. But I remembered every single transaction, not out of pettiness, because every cent of that money could have been spent on Leo. My son's formula went from imported to domestic. His early education classes, enrolled in, and then pulled out. He wanted to learn to swim, and I told him to wait until next year. And every single time I had to say no, Julian was the reason. Inava's hands were trembling. She flipped through the contents of the box, page by page. Those receipts, contracts, transfer records, they were all things I'd collected over the years, each one labeled with a date and amount. At the very bottom, she found a photograph. It was taken the year Leo was born. My father was holding his grandson, smiling so widely his eyes crinkled into slits. He was still in good health then, wearing a grey jacket faded from washing, holding Leo up in his arms, his face alight with undisguisable pride. On the back of the photo, in my father's own handwriting, were 2 lines. "To my grandson Leo, Grandpa has saved this money for your college. Study hard and grow up to be someone worthy." Ava stared at those 2 lines. It was as if the bones had been pulled from her body. She slowly sank into a crouch. She crouched there in front of my father's photograph, one hand braced on the floor, the other covering her mouth. The old man in that photo was gone. The only thing he'd left for his grandson had been taken and used to keep an irrelevant stranger alive. "I didn't know," she said, looking up at me, her eyes swimming with tears. "I really didn't know this was what your dad left for Leo." "There are many things you didn't know," I said, leaning against the desk and looking down at her. You didn't know Leo ran a fever for 3 days after his last blood donation. You didn't know he has nightmares at night shouting, "Mommy, don't stick me!" And you didn't know that over these years, Julian's debts, one after another, who it was that finally had to fill in the holes. I crouched down, bringing myself to her eye level. Ava, I won't hold you accountable for all the money you spent on Julian. But the money my father left for Leo, you will pay it back. Something shattered in her eyes. I'll pay it back, she said, her voice barely audible. I will definitely pay it back. Don't pay it back to me. I stood up, walked 2 steps toward the door and glanced back at her. Pay it back to Leo. Inava said she wanted to go to the hospital to talk. She said Julian was now well enough to sit up and speak, and that certain things would be better discussed with all 3 of us present. Ini didn't refuse. After dropping Leo off at kindergarten, I went with her to City Center Hospital. Julian was in a private room in the surgical inpatient ward. The room was filled with flowers and fruit baskets. The nightstand was cluttered with an assortment of nutritional supplements, and a guitar rested on the windowsill. He was half sitting up in bed. Though his complexion was still pale, his spirits had noticeably recovered. I'd lost count of how many times I'd seen Julian Blackwood by now. He was admittedly a handsome man. Even fresh from major surgery, leaning against the hospital bed, he possessed a natural, pitiable charm. He was the kind of man who could make a woman's heart ache instinctively, fair-skinned with gentle brows, who would give a soft cough every couple of sentences as if a strong wind might knock him over. When Ava pushed open the door, Julian's face immediately lit up with a fragile smile. Ava, you came. He called her Ava. I'd been hearing this form of address for 7 years. Julian noticed me standing in the doorway, and his smile dimmed a few degrees, but he still nodded politely. Ethan's here too. Please have a seat. I didn't sit. Get out, I said to Julian. The air in the hospital room instantly congealed. Julian's smile froze on his face. He looked at Ava, his eyes carrying a question and a trace of hurt he couldn't quite hide. Inava positioned herself in front of the bed. Ethan, if you have something to say it properly. Don't be like this. I have nothing to say to him, and what I need to say to you doesn't require him to be here. In the end, Julian was wheeled out by a nurse for his rehab checkup. Only Ava and I remained in the room. The smell of disinfectant was thick. The occasional rattle of a gurney echoed from the hallway. I got straight to the point. That insurance money was the education fund my father left for Leo, $170,000. Since you used it to prolong Julian's life, I'll take that as your choice having been made. Ava stood with her arms crossed by the window, not looking at me. I told you I'll pay it back.
With what?
I've looked into your salary account. Last month, your balance was less than $40,000. The rehab fees you fronted for Julian still haven't been reimbursed. Ava pressed her lips into a tight line. So I've come up with a compromise, I continued. Our house, in market value about $3 million. Your half, liquidate it and pay me back. The $170,000 will be deducted from your share, calculated against the property value. You sign an agreement forfeiting the corresponding portion of your half of the property. Ava whipped her head around, her eyes wide. You want me to give you the house? I don't want you to give it to me, I said. I want you to return it to Leo. Her chest heaved violently. Her hands clenched into fists, hanging rigidly at her sides. Outside the window, the wail of an ambulance siren grew closer, then farther. The fluorescent tubes buzzed over. Time in that hospital room seemed to stretch out endlessly. Ethan Winters, we were married for 7 years. Her voice had gone hoarse. You're going to reduce 7 years of a marriage just for a sum of money to numbers in an account book? The accounts between us were opened 7 years ago, I said, stepping closer to her, standing face to face. It's just that before, I was the only one keeping the books. You never bothered to look. It was Julian's life. If I didn't save him, who would? Ava's voice finally shot up in volume, her red-rimmed eyes looking ready to bleed. He has no parents, no family. He only has me. Who will help him if I don't? You have a husband. And a son, I said, enunciating each word. Do your husband and your son not deserve to be ranked ahead of him? Ava looked at me and her tears finally fell. She cried for a long time until her shoulders shook, until she had to brace herself against the windowsill to keep from collapsing. Then she raised a hand, wiped her face, took a deep breath, and spoke in a voice raw with tears. "Fine, I'll talk to you about the house, but you have to agree to cover Julian's follow-up rehab costs as well." "Impossible. Ethan Winters." "There's not a single cent more." I cut her off. "The insurance money my dad left for Leo, I gave it all to you. If you want Leo to do anything more for Julian, you'll have to step over my dead body first." Ava was stunned. She stared at me, and the light in her eyes slowly extinguished, replaced by a fury I'd never seen before. A fury born of being wounded to the absolute limit and having nothing left to lose. She raised her hand and swung a slap at me. Enfast, fierce, carrying every ounce of resentment and desperation of a woman driven into a corner. Innie didn't dodge. My hand came up and caught her wrist firmly in midair. In her palm stopped, barely a hand's span from my cheek, held suspended by my grip. Innie wasn't squeezing hard, but it was enough that she couldn't move an inch. Neva struggled, couldn't break free, and froze, completely rigid. 7 years. Every time you lashed out at me, I yielded, I said, holding her wrist, looking into her eyes. "You thought I wasn't good enough. Not as considerate as Julian, not as good with words, not as understanding of you. You thought I was stingy, calculating, not generous enough. But you forgot one thing." I slowly pressed her wrist down. "Everything he ever took from you, I, Ethan Winters, was the one who paid for it. When you spent money on him, I was the one holding things up behind the scenes. When you gave him blood, it was my son bearing the pain in your place." Ava's face was as pale as paper. The sound of wheelchair wheels came from the hallway. The nurse was bringing Julian back. The moment he saw the two of us standing face to face, me holding Ava's wrist, his expression shifted dramatically. "Ava, what's going on?" Ava abruptly yanked her wrist from my grasp, turned away, and wiped her face. She took a deep breath. When she turned back, she'd already reassembled that composed and unflappable doctor's mask. Had her eyes not still been red, you would barely have known she'd been crying just moments before. "It's nothing, Julian. We were just discussing some family matters." Julian was brought back into the room. Sitting on his bed, he eyed me warily, then looked at Ava. His lips moved, but ultimately he said nothing. Before I left, I stood in the doorway of the hospital room and glanced back at Ava. "My lawyer Nathan will send the agreement over tomorrow. You sign it, and the house is settled. You don't sign, I'll see you in court." Ava didn't respond. She sat beside Julian's bed, her head lowered, her hands folded together on her knees. You couldn't see the expression on her face. And as the elevator doors slid shut, I heard Julian's voice drift faintly from the hospital room. "Ava, is he bullying you again?" The mechanical hum of the elevator swallowed whatever came after. I leaned back against the elevator wall and closed my eyes. Bullying. That word, coming from Julian's mouth, was the most absurd joke in the world. He'd spent 7 years taking everything I had, then turned around and asked if I was bullying someone. The elevator reached the ground floor. The doors opened, and sunlight flooded in through the glass doors of the lobby, washing over me. I straightened my collar and strode out. After Julian's discharge date was confirmed, Ava sent me a message. She said Julian's recovery had gone better than expected. His attending physician had approved him for home rest. He'd only need to come back to the hospital periodically for rehab checkups. She also said she wanted to set a time with me to sit down and talk seriously about the divorce. The message came at 10 in the morning. I was in a meeting at the firm. I glanced at the screen, then turned my phone face down on the table. Talk. There was nothing left to talk about. The agreement was laid out in black and white. Not a single term would be changed. She could sign it, or she could wait for the court summons. Innie didn't reply. At 3 that afternoon, Nathan knocked on my office door, and behind him was a woman in her 50s wearing gold-rimmed glasses. "Ethan, this is Dr. Margaret Chen, Chief of Surgery at City Center Hospital. She says there's something she needs to discuss with you in person. Chief Margaret Chen. I'd heard Ava mention this name before, her direct superior, the head of the surgery department at City Center, a veteran of 30 years who had seen every storm there was to see. Margaret sat down across from me, her posture upright, hands folded neatly on her knees. She had the unmistakable bearing of someone who'd spent most of her life in the institutional system. She skipped the pleasantries and pulled a document directly from her briefcase, placing it on the table. Mr. Winters, I'm here today in a personal capacity. This concerns Ava. I poured her a glass of water and gestured for her to continue. Last month, the blood bank at City Center Hospital conducted an internal audit. Margaret pushed her glasses up, speaking at a measured pace, but every word was articulated clearly. The audit found that over the past 3 years, Ava has requisitioned rare blood-type plasma from the blood bank under the pretense of emergency surgeries. The cumulative requisition records exceed 20 instances, over 20. Innie chewed on that number silently. Leo had given blood only 3 times, yet Ava had requisitioned plasma from the blood bank over 20 times. This meant that beyond using my son's blood, she'd also been depleting the hospital's public reserves. In a surgeon, all to keep a man with no blood relation to her alive, had repeatedly drawn on the hospital's communal resources. Of those 20-plus requisitions, more than half lack complete approval documentation. Margaret opened the file, her finger resting on a specific page. According to hospital regulations, any requisition of rare blood-type plasma must go through a 2-tier approval process, the director of the blood bank and the deputy director of the hospital. Nava used the emergency green light channel and never completed the paperwork after the fact. So what happens now? So the hospital disciplinary committee has officially opened a case, Margaret said, removing her glasses and rubbing the bridge of her nose. She looked deeply weary. I held it off for as long as I could. Innie really couldn't hold it off any longer. The blood bank's accounts don't balance. The audit department reported the discrepancy up the chain. The disciplinary committee had no choice but to investigate. Margaret paused here, seeming to weigh her next words carefully. She looked up at me, her gaze probing. Mr. Winters, I've worked with Ava for 8 years. I fully recognize her medical skill and her character. But this matter, if the investigation confirms she engaged in procedural violations, the minimum penalty would be a major demerit and suspension of her prescription privileges. And at the worst, she could face legal liability. Having said her piece, she sat quietly, waiting for my reaction. I leaned back in my chair and gently closed the file in front of me. Then, I pulled open the bottommost drawer on the right side of my desk and took out a document, the divorce agreement. I flipped to the second page, my finger resting on Clause 7. Chief Chen, please take a look at this. Margaret took the agreement, squinting as she read line by line. The text of Clause 7 wasn't long. I'd agonized over every word when I originally drafted it, and each one had passed Nathan's legal scrutiny. Clause 7 was precisely written, both parties confirm that any debts or legal liabilities incurred individually during the existence of the marriage shall be independently borne by the respective party. Any legal consequences arising from either party's individual conduct, including but not limited to administrative penalties, civil compensation, or criminal liability, shall have no relation to the other party, and the other party shall bear no joint liability whatsoever. After reading the clause, Margaret slowly lifted her head. Her entire expression toward me shifted. When did you draft this agreement? A long time ago, I said. So long that I can no longer remember which year I wrote it. Margaret set the agreement back on the desk and was silent for a long moment. What you're telling me, Mr. Winters, is that you do not intend to involve yourself in Ava's situation at the hospital? Chief Chen, it's not that I don't intend to. I took the agreement back and placed it back in the drawer. It's that she never needed me to. She has her own ideas, her own choices, her own path. She didn't ask me before she requisitioned blood for Julian. She didn't ask me before she covered his medical expenses. She didn't ask me before she used my son's body as a favor to someone else. Now that there are consequences, why should I be the one to clean up her mess? Margaret opened her mouth, but in the end said nothing. She stood up, briefcase in hand, and walked to the door. In there, She looked back at me. Mr. Winters, I've known Ava for 8 years. She's not a bad person. She's just when it comes to Julian, she has no reason. I gave a faint, humorless smile. Chief Chen, it's not that she has no reason when it comes to Julian. It's that she has no reason when it comes to everything besides Julian. That includes her husband. That includes her son. After Margaret left, the office was profoundly quiet. The setting sun outside dyed the room orange-red. I sat in my swivel chair, staring at the empty room for a while. Then I picked up my phone and sent Ava a message. Chief Chen came to see me today. The hospital disciplinary committee has opened a case regarding your blood bank activities. Go take another look at Clause 7 of the divorce agreement yourself. The trouble you've stirred up by taking blood for Julian has nothing to do with me. The message sent. The screen showed read. Ava didn't reply. I waited 5 minutes, then pocketed my phone and got up to pack my briefcase. Leo had been asking for sweet and sour ribs for dinner tonight. I needed to hit the grocery store. Walking down to the lobby of the office building, my phone buzzed twice in my pocket. I took it out. Ava had replied. 8 words. Ethan Winters, you are truly so cruel. Standing in the bustling lobby of the office tower, I stared at those 8 words for a long time. Then I turned the screen off and pushed through the doors. Cruel, that word, coming from a woman who had drained her son's education fund for another man, was irony pushed to its absolute extreme. Innie didn't respond. I hailed a taxi to the supermarket, picked out the baby back ribs Leo loved, along with tomatoes and eggs. At the checkout, my phone buzzed again. Nathan this time. Buddy, got something to tell you. Nathan's voice was low. Ava just called me, asking about Clause 7. She says, you set a trap for her with that clause, that you were deliberately waiting for her to fall into it. What did you tell her? I told her she read every single word of that agreement herself. If she didn't hire a lawyer to review it before she signed, that's on her. Thanks. Don't thank me. Just keep your footing steady. Nathan paused. A disciplinary committee investigation is no small matter. If she can't handle the pressure, she might come to you and kick up a storm. Let her come. I hung up, picked up my grocery bags, and walked out of the supermarket. Night had fallen. The streetlights were lit in rows, the sycamore trees along the road rustling in the wind. Innie stood at the entrance, took a deep breath of cool air, and then strode toward home. The lights at home were on. Leo was sprawled on the coffee table drawing. The neighbor's wife sat on the sofa browsing her phone. When she saw me come in, she gave a quick greeting and left. Leo ran over holding up a drawing. It showed 2 figures, one big, one small, holding hands. This is Daddy, and this is me, he told me, pointing. I crouched down and pulled him into my arms. He smelled of his bath wash, and his soft hair brushed against my chin. Where's Mommy? I asked him. Leo thought for a moment, then shook his head. I don't know, he said. Mommy hasn't called me in a long time. I put the ribs in the kitchen, tied on an apron, and started to cook. The oil sizzled in the wok, and the sweet and sour aroma slowly filled the air. Leo stood in the kitchen doorway, standing on his tiptoes to peer at the stovetop. Daddy, is it just going to be the 2 of us from now on? My hand paused mid-stir. Maybe, I said. Leo tilted his head, considered this, then nodded. That's okay, he said. Then he ran back to the living room to continue his drawing. I stood in front of the stove, my hand gripping the spatula, trembling slightly. It wasn't sadness. It was the feeling that something in that moment had finally been let go. On the day of Julian's discharge, Ava sent me a message. Julian is leaving the hospital today. He says he wants to thank you in person for helping pay his medical bills. I didn't reply to this message. Julian's thanks. I had no desire to hear a single word of it. That afternoon, Nathan called. He said Julian had arranged to meet with a lawyer. He wanted to discuss some kind of agreement with Ava. How do you know this? I asked Nathan. The lawyer he hired is a junior colleague of mine. Nathan laughed on the other end of the line. My colleague tipped me off. Instead, Julian's drawn up a loan agreement to settle all the medical bills Ava fronted for him, once and for all. My attention sharpened. A repayment agreement? No. In agreement to sever ties and responsibility, Nathan said, his voice turning cold. Julian's position is that all those medical expenses were voluntary payments from Ava, gifts, not loans. He wants her to sign an agreement in black and white, stating that from now on those expenses have nothing to do with him and he is not obligated to repay a cent. My hand slowly tightened around the phone. She had bankrupted herself for him, thrown in our son's education fund. And the first thing he did upon waking up wasn't to thank her for the half-month she'd spent sleeping in a hospital chair caring for him. It was to hire a lawyer to cut all ties with her. "Buddy, you want to come see for yourself?" Nathan asked. They're meeting at the Upland coffee shop across from City Center Hospital. 3 o'clock. I checked my watch. 2:20. I'll be there. I had Nathan pick Leo up from school for me, and I hailed a cab to City Center Hospital. Once I got there, I didn't go into the coffee shop. I bought a coffee at the convenience store across the street and stood behind the glass window, watching the Upland coffee shop on the other side of the road. At 3:10, Ava arrived. She came out of the hospital entrance, wearing a white dress, her hair loose over her shoulders. She'd lost a lot of weight recently. Her cheekbones jutted out prominently. But even so, she was still the most beautiful woman in any crowd. Walking past the hospital gates, several patients waiting for appointments turned to look at her. She pushed open the coffee shop door, scanned the room, spotted Julian seated in a corner booth, and a smile bloomed on her face. I could see that smile clearly. It was tender, tinged with worry, the smile of someone going to see a person who had kept her heart in suspense. Julian was seated in the booth, a man in a suit beside him, likely the lawyer Nathan had mentioned. Julian was dressed today in a crisp light blue shirt, his hair neatly combed. There was no trace of the invalid left in his face. He leaned back against the sofa, legs crossed, the picture of ease. It was a stark contrast to Ava's nervous, hopeful demeanor. I stood leaning against the glass door with my coffee, watching this drama unfold inside the cafe across the street. At first, everything looked calm. Julian said something and Ava smiled. She said a few things, probably asking about his recovery. The man in the suit didn't interject, just sat to the side quietly flipping through documents. Then the lawyer slid a document across the table in front of Ava. Anava looked down at it, and the smile on her face slowly froze. She looked up and asked something. Julian didn't answer, just gestured for the lawyer to speak for him. The lawyer opened the document, pointed to the terms, and went through them page by page, explaining. Ava listened. Her expression shifted from confusion to shock, from shock to utter disbelief. She whipped her head toward Julian. Through the glass, I couldn't see her exact expression, but I could see her shoulders trembling, her hand pressed down on the document, her knuckles white as a sheet. Her lips moved, and she spoke a single sentence, probably something like, "Is this what you want?" Julian nodded. That nod was crisp, decisive, without a flicker of hesitation. Anava looked like she'd been slapped across the face, in her entire body slumped back against the booth. She sat there, motionless, staring at the document in front of her as if it were something utterly alien. The lawyer was speaking at her side. Julian was slowly sipping his coffee, occasionally nodding, his composure graceful and unhurried, as if he were negotiating an ordinary business deal that had nothing whatsoever to do with feelings. Inava's hand lifted from the document. Her hands fell to her knees, nails digging into her palms. Her whole body was coiled like a string about to snap. Then she spoke. Her voice must have been loud because I could faintly hear the pitch of it even from across the street. It was the sound of someone losing control. Shrill, trembling, tearful. Julian set down his coffee cup, frowning as he said something. His expression wasn't guilt, it was impatience, the bone-deep impatience of someone who's been pestered for far too long, written all over his face. Then he stood up, signaled the lawyer to pack the documents, turned and walked away. Ava shot up from her seat and went after him. She grabbed Julian's sleeve. He shook her off, lightly. The gesture was small but utterly final, like someone brushing off an insistent stranger. She stood in the aisle of the coffee shop, watching Julian and the lawyer push the door open and leave. "My name is Ethan Winters. I have known Ava for 7 years, from when she was 26 until now at 33. She is a proud woman. So proud she has never once shown weakness to anyone. So proud that she would never bow her head, even when she knew she was wrong. So proud that even when her husband caught her with her heart full of another man, she bit down and refused to admit it. But this proud woman, after her white moonlight turned and walked away without looking back, slowly crouched down. She crouched on the steps outside the hospital, buried her face in her knees, and her shoulders shook violently. The coffee cup in my hand had gone cold. I watched that woman crouched across the street, sobbing, and felt neither the thrill of vengeance nor any pang of sympathy. I couldn't quite name what I felt. Something hollow, like finally reaching the end of a 7-year-long, cheap, predictable movie whose ending had been a foregone conclusion all along. I tossed my coffee cup in the trash, crossed the street, and came to a stop in front of her. Inava sensed someone standing before her and looked up. Her face was streaked with tears, her eyeliner smudged, leaving 2 gray trails from the corners of her eyes. The moment she recognized me, a complex flurry of emotion flickered through her eyes. Then she hastily raised her hands and wiped the tears from her face. "You saw all that?" Her voice was wrecked, hoarse beyond recognition, like someone using the very last of their strength to cling to some shred of dignity. I didn't answer her. I simply took the copy of the divorce agreement I'd been holding and laid it gently on the step beside her. "Time to sign, Ava." Inava disappeared for a while. The hospital's investigation was temporarily suspended. Chief Chen called me once to say the disciplinary committee had given Ava a suspension for reflection, and her medical license was temporarily preserved, but everything still depended on the final conclusion of the blood bank audit. Chief Chen sighed on the phone, saying that in 30 years of medicine she'd never seen a doctor make such a foolish mistake as Ava. I didn't take up the remark. The word foolish was far too light a word for what Ava had done. During that time, I raised Leo on my own. Our days passed plainly and rhythmically. In mornings I dropped him at school. Daytimes I handled cases at the firm. Afternoons I picked him up. Evenings I cooked, built Lego with him, read him stories. The osmanthus tree outside our new apartment had bloomed every day when I opened the window. A sweet fragrance drifted in. Leo said the new house smelled better than the old one. I told him then we'd just stay here forever. He didn't press the divorce agreement. Whether Ava signed it or not was no longer the most important thing to me. Nathan had verified for me her blood bank violation records were already on file. Here the terms of Clause 7. This matter had absolutely nothing to do with me. The debts she'd racked up, legally I didn't have to bear a single cent of them. I could afford to wait. That day was a Saturday. Around 3 in the afternoon, Leo was sitting on the floor playing with his Lego, and I was in the kitchen cutting fruit for him. The doorbell rang. Ini wiped my hands and went to answer the door. Inava stood outside. She had lost a startling amount of weight. Her collarbones jutted out enough to hold water, and her wrists were so thin they looked like they might snap at the slightest touch. She was dressed in a simple cream-colored cashmere sweater, her hair cut short to just above her shoulders. She looked a full size smaller overall. In her left hand, she carried a bouquet of white baby's breath. In her right, a paper bag with the ear of a plush teddy bear poking out. She stood in the doorway, a cautious, tentative smile pulled across her lips. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside to let her pass. Inava changed into house slippers and walked in. She paused at the edge of the living room, her gaze landing on Leo, who was sitting on the floor. Her eyes instantly reddened, but she held it back, took a deep breath, and slowly crouched down. Leo looked up. The moment he saw Ava, his eyes lit up. It was that innate, irrepressible light any child gets at the sight of their mother, but he didn't charge at her like he used to. He didn't call out, "Mommy." He just sat there on the floor, a Lego brick in his hand, looking from Ava to me. "Mommy," he said, finally. His voice was quiet. Ava walked over and crouched in front of him, holding out the baby's breath and the paper bag. Leo, Mommy bought you a teddy bear and flowers. Look, see if you like them. Leo took the teddy bear and looked down at it. It was a little brown bear with a blue bow tie around its neck. The fur was incredibly soft, the craftsmanship fine, clearly not cheap. Leo hugged it to his chest and said softly, "Thank you, Mommy." Ava's face broke into a smile. She reached out to stroke his head but stopped midway, her hand retracting. Maybe she remembered something. Remembered that the last time she came, she had been smiling just like this too. "Leo, how about Mommy takes you out for ice cream today? Just at the shop downstairs. Your favorite strawberry flavor." Leo held the bear and didn't answer. He looked down, his little hands fidgeting with the bear's ear. His lips moved a couple of times, as if he were debating whether or not to speak. Anava leaned a little closer, softening her voice further. "Leo, Mommy knows you weren't happy about giving blood before. Mummy's sorry. I promise I'll never make you give blood again. Okay?" Finally, Leo lifted his head. He looked at Ava, his eyes dark and clear. There was no anger on his little face, nor any sadness, only a cautious wariness that didn't belong on a 6-year-old. He scooted backward, moving until he was next to my leg, then hid behind me. Felt his small hand clutch the fabric of my pants. Then his voice came from behind me, soft as a feather landing on water. Mommy was smiling the last time she took my blood, too. The smile on Ava's face froze solid. Her hands holding the baby's breath went slack. The bouquet fell to the floor. The tiny white blossoms scattered fragments of petals spreading across the floorboards at her feet like a silent, fine-grained snowfall. She crouched there, her hands still cupped in the shape of holding the flowers, but there was nothing in them now. She stared at Leo hiding behind me. Her lips trembled. Something inside her eyes shattered into powder. The air was utterly still for what felt like a dozen seconds. The only sound in the living room was the ticking of the wall clock. Outside, someone was walking a dog. Barking drifted up faintly. Downstairs, a kid was riding a scooter, the sound of wheels scraping pavement fading in and out. Inava's knees buckled. She didn't fall. She knelt. Her knees hit the floor with a dull, heavy thud. A few more blossoms of baby's breath were crushed beneath her, white fragments sticking to the hem of her skirt. She knelt there before me, before Leo, her hands braced on her thighs, her fingernails white from the strain. "Ethan," she said my name, and her voice was so broken it barely held together, as if she'd swallowed every possible word and only had the strength left to push out my name. "Forgive me." She didn't say "I'm sorry." That was Ava saying sorry was harder for her than dying. But she knelt there on my floor, no makeup on her face, her hair a mess plastered to her cheeks. Tears streamed down and dripped off her chin onto that plain cream-colored sweater, spreading in dark, damp blotches. "Let me have Leo," she said, her voice shaking. "Let me make it up to him. I'll never care about Julian again." I blocked him. Really blocked him. "Look." With frantic, trembling fingers, she pulled her phone from her pocket and swiped the screen, thrusting the blacklist page toward me. Julian's name was indeed there, along with his social media accounts, his email, all blocked. He got a lawyer to sever ties with me. Ava said the tears falling faster now, too fast to wipe away. He said all that money I spent on him, I gave it voluntarily. It had nothing to do with him. He didn't even say thank you. He just walked away. Her voice dwindled, so low it was almost a monologue. 13 years. I've known him for 13 years, since college. He twisted his ankle playing ball. I bought him medicine. He got dumped. I stayed up all night with him. He racked up gambling debts. I used my dowry to pay them off. I thought he was just immature. I thought one day he'd change. She raised her head and looked at me, her red-rimmed eyes looking like they might bleed. He never thought about changing. When he woke up and saw me, the first thing he said wasn't thank you. It was that he wanted water. I brought him water. He didn't even glance at me. I stood where I was, looking down at her kneeling on the floor. It felt like an old wall in my heart, Brick by brick was falling down. 7 years. I'd waited 7 years for her to see that man clearly. But I didn't feel happy. "Get up," I said. Ava shook her head. "Let me kneel." She lifted a hand to scrub at her tears. "Let me kneel and finish saying this. Then, all these years, everything I owe you, no amount of I'm sorry could ever be enough. But Leo is my life. Let me come back. Let me—" "Your life?" I cut her off. My voice wasn't loud, but every word landed with force. "Did you hear what Leo just said? He said you were smiling the last time, too." Ava's shoulders convulsed violently as if someone had lashed her across the back. "He's afraid of you." I took a step forward. "He's 6 years old, and he's already learned that when you smile, he should step back." Ava lifted her tear-drenched eyes toward Leo. He was still hiding behind me, only half his face showing, his small hand gripping my pant leg and refusing to let go. He looked at Ava, kneeling on the floor. His lips moved, but he didn't step forward. He didn't call for his mother. Ava saw that hesitation, that guarded look in her own son's eyes, and finally, completely, fell apart. She didn't cry out loud. It was a silent collapse, in her entire body bent forward, her forehead almost touching the floor, her shoulders heaving for a long, long time. The room was silent. Hugging his new teddy bear, Leo peeked out from behind me, looked for a moment, then withdrew again. He didn't cry. He didn't rush to embrace her. He just tilted his head up and tugged at the hem of my shirt. "Daddy, what's wrong with Mommy?" I bent down and lifted him into my arms, settling him on my hip. He clutched his new teddy bear, a world apart from that stubborn child who once told me I'm not afraid of it hurting. He had learned now, learned to be afraid, learned to hide. "Mommy's tired," I said, stroking his head. Ava knelt on the floor for a long time before she slowly got to her feet. Her knees were shaking. Her face was a mess of tears, her hair plastered to her cheeks. She looked like a banana leaf after a storm. She bent down and picked up the baby's breath, gathering the stems one by one, carefully scooping even the crushed petals into her palm. Then she looked up at me and Leo. "I will sign the agreement," she said, her voice so hoarse it was barely audible. "I won't take my half of the house. I'll carry my debts on my own. What I owe Leo, I won't short him a single penny." She walked to the door, changed her shoes, and pulled the door open. She stepped out, then paused, her back still facing me, her shoulders trembling faintly. "Ethan, the thing I regret most in this life isn't paying off his debts for him." She didn't turn around. Her voice drifted in from the hallway. "It's that it took me 7 years to realize you were the one who never lied to me." The door closed softly. Holding Leo, I stood in the living room, looking down at the scattered fragments of baby's breath lying silently on the floor in the sunlight. The divorce was finalized on an overcast day. Neva signed the agreement, unchanged, word for word. We met at the entrance to City Hall. She wore a black trench coat, her hair neatly tied back, her face done with light makeup that masked the exhaustion at the corners of her eyes. She saw me walking up, holding Leo's hand. Her gaze lingered on Leo for a few seconds, then quickly shifted away. The entire process was quiet. The clerk asked a few routine questions. Ava answered them, her voice steady and even. She only paused once, at the moment of signing. The tip of the pen hovered above the paper for maybe 2 or 3 seconds. Then, crisply, she signed her name. Walking out of City Hall, Ava crouched down to meet Leo's eyes. "Leo, Mommy's going now." Leo looked at her, then at me, and then said softly, "Bye-bye." He didn't cry. He didn't ask why. Neva reached out and pulled the zipper of his jacket up a little higher for him. The gesture was very slow, as if it was something she would never get the chance to do again. Then she stood, turned and walked away. Innie watched her cross the street, past the bus stop, and disappear into the subway entrance. Her silhouette grew smaller and smaller among the crowd until it was finally swallowed by the grey moor of the station. The sky overhead was dark, heavy with unshed rain that never fell. "Daddy, where are we going?" Leo tugged my hand. "To get lunch with Uncle Nathan," I said. Inathan's car was parked in a lot 2 blocks over. He saw us coming, father and son, and honked the horn, sticking his head out the window. Leo let go of my hand and ran over, standing on his tiptoes against the car door, shouting, "Uncle Nathan, did Barney come?" "Barney's at home. Today I'm taking you to get something delicious." Nathan ruffled Leo's hair, then looked up at me. "All done, all done. Let's go. Time to eat." He pulled the car onto the main road. Rush hour hadn't quite started, so the traffic wasn't too bad. The neon signs were flickering on one by one in the twilight. Inathan had some soft jazz playing in the car. In the back seat, Leo was pressed against the window, eagerly counting the giant digital billboards along the road. Inathan took us to a newly opened Cantonese restaurant, tucked away in an alley in the old part of town. The storefront was modest, but the interior was clean and well kept. The owner was a portly, middle-aged man who was clearly on familiar terms with Nathan. He greeted him with a clap on the shoulder, calling him "Old buddy, long time no see." Then he bent down to charm Leo, pressing a peanut candy into his hand. The food came quickly: white-cut chicken, steamed sea bass, dry-fried beef chow fun, and a plate of golden, crispy fried milk custard. Inathan poured me a cup of tea and raised his own cup. Tea instead of booze. "Let's celebrate." "Celebrate what?" I asked. "Celebrate you not having to fill someone else's bottomless pit anymore." Nathan sipped his tea and popped a piece of fried milk into his mouth. 7 years. Calling it a marriage is too generous. In more like 7 years of being a walking wallet and a mobile blood bank. It's over now. That calls for a celebration. Beside him, Leo was clumsily trying to pick up chow fun with his chopsticks. He failed several times and finally just grabbed it with his hands. Inathan laughed at the sight, reached over and scooped some noodles into Leo's bowl. "Leo, is it good?" "It's good," Leo said, his mouth stuffed full, his cheeks puffed out like a little chipmunk. "Better than Daddy's cooking." Nathan shot me a look and laughed. I laughed too. After the meal, Nathan went to pay the bill, and I helped Leo wipe his mouth. Leo suddenly put down his chopsticks, as if remembering something very important. He rummaged through his backpack, hanging on the back of his chair, and pulled out a deep red booklet. In a brand new household registration booklet, the one we'd picked up at City Hall after the divorce was finalized. The old booklet had originally contained 3 names. The new one had just the 2 of us, father and son. Leo flipped open the booklet to the first page and pointed at the names for me to see. "Daddy, this booklet is way lighter than the old one." I was taken aback. "Why is it lighter?" I asked him. "Because it's missing one person," Leo said, tilting his head, his expression utterly earnest. "The old booklet had me and Daddy and Mommy. Now it's just Daddy and me." So it got lighter. He flipped the booklet over and back, inspecting it, as if confirming something. Then he looked up at me and smiled. "Lighter is better," he said. "If it's light, it won't feel heavy in my backpack." Looking at him sprawled across the table, studying that registration booklet with all the seriousness in the world, I suddenly felt my eyes sting. It wasn't grief. It was something else, something I couldn't name. Like a stone that had been pressing on my heart for 7 years had finally been lifted. The empty space it left behind felt a little strange, a little unfamiliar. But more than anything, it felt light, unprecedentedly light. Inathan walked back from the cashier, and seeing Leo bent over the registration booklet, came over to take a look. "Well, look at that. In a new household register." "Yeah." Leo nodded and pointed at the names for Nathan to see. "Uncle Nathan, look, it's just Daddy and me now." Nathan sat down across from me, looking at Leo, then at me. He leaned back in his chair, and a slow smile spread across his face. "Leo, is it light?" "Light," Leo declared loudly. "Good. In light is right," Nathan said. "Some things lose one person and they lose a whole load of weight." I couldn't tell if he was saying it to me or to Leo. The street lamps outside were all lit now, their orange glow spreading across the road and stretching the shadows of passers-by long and thin. The sounds of cooking clattered from the kitchen, a wok clanging against a stove, the owner's wife hollering for the waiter to run a dish. Leo carefully placed the registration booklet back into his school bag, then seemed to remember something. He tugged at my sleeve. "Daddy, let's go with Uncle Nathan to his house and see Barney. It's too late today." I glanced out the window at the dark sky. "Just for a little bit. Tomorrow we can." Before I could finish, my phone vibrated on the table. Ini glanced down. A message from Ava had popped up on the screen. "Agreement received. I'm sorry. Thank you for taking care of Leo." I switched off the screen and turned the phone face down on the table. Inathan glanced at me but didn't ask who it was. "Go see Barney." He stood up, snatching his car keys, and extended a hand toward Leo. "Come on. Uncle Nathan will take you. Let your dad bring the leftovers." Leo let out a cheer, jumped down from his chair, and ran for the door, dragging Nathan by the hand. I packed the leftovers into a takeout bag and followed them out of the restaurant. In there was a draft running through the alley, cool and fresh, carrying the mingled, earthy scents of osmanthus and stir-fried food. Leo bounced ahead, chattering at Nathan. The two of them walked in front of me, one big, one small, their shadows stretched to equal length by the street lamps. I walked behind them and looked up at the sky. Somewhere along the line, the clouds that had been threatening all day had dispersed, revealing a small expanse of deep blue night sky. The moon hung above the crown of a sycamore tree, thin and curved. A very old memory surfaced in my mind. The summer 7 years ago, just after Ava and I had married. Another evening with a moon. She had looped her arm through mine as we walked along the river and told me she thought marrying me was the best decision she'd ever made. 7 years later, her white moonlight had turned and bitten her. She'd been forced by the lawyer he hired to sign an agreement severing all ties. She'd crouched outside the hospital and wept, while her husband placed divorce papers at her feet and walked away. She'd knelt in her son's room, begging for a chance to come back, and her son had hidden behind her husband's back and said she'd been smiling the last time too. Karma is a wheel. No one escapes what they owe. From the mouth of the alley, Leo shouted back at me, "Daddy, hurry up! Barney's waiting for us." I quickened my pace and caught up. Inathan already had the car key out. The headlights blinked twice, the car waiting quietly in the moonlight. I opened the door, lifted Leo into the back seat, and fastened his seatbelt. The new household register was tucked in the outermost pocket of his backpack, its deep red cover catching the glow of the street lamps. It was very light, lighter than the old one by the exact weight of a single person. But it held everything it needed to, a father and a son and all the clear, bright years that lay ahead of them.